This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 777. Today we're going to talk about 51st State, the Ultimate Edition. Now 51st State is a game that has been around for a while. I did my first, I think, and only review of it 7 years ago when it was the Masters Edition, and it had already been out a few years at that point. And it's also kind of got a different iteration. So if you're familiar with the Imperial Settlers or Imperial Settlers Empires of the North games, they have a lot of the same DNA as 51st State does. 51st State was the kind of the original, and it's kind of a sort of Mad Max or Fallout, more like Fallout than Mad Max, but a kind of a post-apocalyptic wasteland kind of game. It's a card game, and it's driven in similar ways to other card games like a San Juan or Glory to Rome or Race for the Galaxy, that kind of thing, where you have multi-use cards. And this game really kind of leans into the multi-use because it has, you know, not just two uses where you play it or use it to spend for something else. You can like make a deal with it. You can raise it. You can build it. All kinds of stuff. So the cards can do a lot of different things. And then this Ultimate Edition come out on GameFound, I believe, about a year ago. And I've actually had this for a couple of months and been playing off and on. And then I took like a vacation and came back and played some other stuff. And then I was like, I gotta review this, and because I've really been enjoying it. And what this Ultimate Edition is, which is, it was on GameFound, but you can find it in retail somewhere. I'll go and check and put a note or something in the video here. But you can get it around. It won't be exactly what I'm going to show you here, because some of this has some of the GameFound exclusive stuff, and I don't know exactly, but I'll tell you the stuff that I do know. The rulebook kind of points it out. But I wouldn't feel like you were missing out or anything. Maybe they'll run another GameFound campaign and, you know, put some more of those exclusives back in. They're not really gameplay exclusives. They're more like, you know, cosmetic. So you won't be missing out on anything gameplay wise. But what this includes, long story short, or long story long, is the base game, and then I think all the expansions and all the promos and a couple of new promos and stuff like that. So you can play it in a lot of different modes. It's got a solo mode, which I'll talk about, and all that stuff. So we'll get down to the table here, and I'll come back and kind of give you my thoughts. Like I said, I kind of reviewed it 7 years ago, so I liked it back then. So, you know, caveat with that going into it, but we'll wait for the review part. But let's go down to the table and come back. Okay, so I kind of have it loosely unboxed here because I wanted to show you. I don't like to talk about inserts all the time because it's kind of boring, but the insert's actually very functional in this one. So I have this part taken out, and then this part would sit on top of that here. This is nice because you can just take this out and you've got access to all the different resources here. And I think these are sort of GameFound exclusives because they have kind of the little sort of engraved little pieces on there like the deal tokens and the raise tokens and so on. So you've got those here. Actually, these are the deal tokens, raise tokens. These are the resources to buy those. But for the resource tokens, these are nice bits here, and then the workers and stuff like that. So this is nice. You can just pull this out, set it to the side. And then here, which is really nice, it comes with all the different factions that you can play. I think there's 8 total. And so this gives you some of your asymmetry and so on, and these are just the same on both sides. So you can set them up how you wish. So this is super nice. So it makes it really easy to just pick up and set up and play. And here's a nice little start player marker there. And the nice thing about this compartment here is you can there's lots of expansions in this game. I don't know the count. I think it's like 6 or 7. Now, one thing that's different about 51st State compared to something like Race for the Galaxy, although you can do this in Race for the Galaxy, but the rules in here specifically state, like, hey, you want to grab, let's see, No Man's Land, and use those cards. So you'll grab these set of cards here, shuffle them into the base game, and then take out whatever expansion you might have shuffled in there. So I've got my ready to go game here. I think the Scavengers was the last ones I played. So I've got those here, so I can take, you know, I'll take those out and then I'll buy, you know, get the Moloch one or the New Era expansion and so on. You can kind of work your way up. I think it starts at New Era and then Scavengers and Allies and so on. There's Winter. I think it goes either New Era first or Winter first, but the order is kind of in the rule book there. And so you can kind of play through those or just play with the base game. I'm not going to get super into the gameplay. I will link my old review there, and the game's been out for a while. But I'll talk about some of the mechanics and some of the expansions and the solo stuff for sure here. But so one of the nice things about this game, just kind of reviewing it here at the moment, is it doesn't say shuffle everything together, you know, because it specifically says don't do that. It says shuffle the base game with this, shuffle the base game with this, depending on which expansion you're using. And the expansions will start to vary in complexity. It'll just be some new cards, and then some new cards with some extra mechanics, like the scavengers, which I was just playing with the other day. That has, you create your own discard pile and you interact with that. And then you've got the Moloch expansion, which is right here. And this is one of my favorite expansions. And so these cards will come out and they'll kind of attack the players. So you can see there's like an assault phase, which I think happens after production. So if your lookout phase where you draw cards, your buildings will produce stuff, and then these things will assault you. And so you can set the difficulty of this. So all of these will be kind of harassing the different players, but then you can try to hack, basically you spending these resources here to sort of hack it, or you can raise it and basically spend the raise tokens to destroy it. So you can destroy it, or you can hack it and flip it over, and then now you've got a little building there. So that's something that is like a little bit more complex. Then you've also got the No Man's Land, and I know this is kind of a game found thing. Now, in the retail game, these will just be different cards. There's 9 cards here that you set up. And then you'll take, and in the first round of the game, you'll start to put out these outpost tokens here on the different territories, which there's these 9 different territories. Then you can upgrade those territories, and then you can also shield them from getting raised and so on. And these are just ways for you to kind of score tons of different bonuses. So maybe you start in this corner, your opponents will start over in this corner, and so on. So if you're playing with 4 players, you each start in different corners. And then you can start to encroach on different territory, and you can raise other people's, and then you can start to move in yourself, and so on. And one just component note, let's see if I can find, where's the other one? Oh, here it is. So here we go. So you have kind of the 4 different outposts, but they're all the same color, and like these 2 kind of look the same, so it gets a little bit confusing if you have a lot of players with those. And all the expansions that I'm showing you here, whether it's just cards or some of the more complex ones like this, then you can play that against the AI. Now there is sort of the standard solo mode that's been out for a while. I'm not sure exactly how long, but there's also here, and it's really simple. Let's see if I can get to it. Yeah, here we go. So this is called the Borgo Automa. It's 2 pages of rules, 1 and 2. One of the nice things that it does here, if we take a little bit of a zoom in, is it will color code the changes to the game. So here we've got the setup, and then it will color code based on which expansion. So anything in the blue here will be for the Moloch expansion, and then if we look over here, anything in this sort of light brown is for the outpost. So you can very quickly see you know, what kind of the differences are that will happen. So, you know, Moloch will do an assault phase and a deploy phase, and so on. Or you can kind of ignore those different colored things, just read through the black text, you know, maybe the first time you play it, and then kind of get the hang of how the Borgo Automa operates, and then you can start to slowly, you know, mix in expansions and stuff like that. Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about this since we're talking about it right now. Is what this guide is going to do is it's way better than the original you know, solo mode for sure, because you're actually playing against a player who's going to interact with you. So the rules for the solo are pretty much the same as, you know, playing with other players. You will keep track of the rounds here. So because based on the round, you're going to give the AI player, Borgo, a certain number of these little workers, and they're called brawlers. And so these will get spent, and you can actually trigger ways to kind of spend them. But you can see as the rounds go along, they're going to get more and more workers, which allows them to activate some like different cool special abilities that they can do. And of course you also will keep track, and it's the same idea. Once somebody hits 25, that will be the last round. Then you'll total up your points from all the buildings that you've built and so on, any end game points. And then whoever has the most points is the winner. And the way that Borgo will kind of operate is they will flip cards off the deck here, and in similar Automa fashion, they will do actions based on, you know, the different icons that are on these different cards. And in the rules here, you can see based on what the icons are, they will do. And it's worth noting they will do multiple. So if there was a card with, 2 icons on it, it's going to do both based on that. So it could do multiple different things. So if it doesn't have any of these special ones here, then it's going to do standard action, right? Or it's going to do an attack, or it's going to do a build, or it's going to do an expansion. So the interesting part of this with the standard is if you have some of these deals, so you've got your deals here with the punks and the merchants and everything like that. So it will just grab one of those. So this kind of forces you to chase these down, because every time it does that, it'll get a connection, sorry, not a deal, a connection, and then it will discard it and score 2 points. Otherwise, it's going to get rid of a brawler. Remember, it gets dealt a certain number of brawlers, and then it scores a point. So it kind of makes you go after those, and that's the only way that interacts with those. So that's a standard action. If it doesn't attack, it will also discard a brawler, and then it will draw the next card off the deck, and then try to attack one of the buildings that has a matching icon there. And there's a little bit of a sort of a hierarchy of the types of buildings it goes after there. And then if it does a build action, it'll just flip the top card and build it. And then where it kind of comes into play with the expansions, you've got this expansion action. So depending on which expansion you've chosen here, it will do a couple of different things based on that. And that's pretty much how it's set up there. The other thing is to note, when it does the lookout phase, instead of drawing the card and keeping it, it's actually going to just immediately build the card that it selects there. So it's very nice. I played through all of these except for the Allies one. I played through all the different expansions, and I'll talk more about this in the review, but it's nice because you can kind of tailor your difficulty level a little bit with some of the different expansions that you use. That'll make it more or less difficult. Specifically, the Moloch one is kind of nice because Borgo doesn't really have to interact with them, and then so you could really crank the difficulty on that if you wanted to make it a more difficult game. And depending on which some of the expansions you're going to use, some of them were going to be more attacky than others. Okay, so that's kind of a brief overview of 51st State Ultimate Edition. We'll go ahead and jump into my pillars of review because I think it's kind of worth revisiting the game as a whole, and I'll talk about some of the details specifics with some of the solo mode expansions and so on that's available in this box. So, playtime, what does the box say? I'm not sure what the box says here. I might have to take this out and look at the back. It says 60-90 minutes. I think that sounds right. That will have to do with the number of players because, well, as far as solo 1, 2, and 3 players, that's about the player count that I like it, which is my second pillar. I wouldn't really want to play as a 4. It just kind of gets a little too chaotic at the table. I think there's just so much going on, so much to keep track of. Everybody's got tons of cards in front of them, all these different buildings. And, trying to figure out who to attack and who to raise their buildings and, all that kind of stuff. It can kind of feel bad if it, somebody's attacking you and it's like, well, why don't you attack Billy? He's in the lead, obviously, that kind of thing. So at 4 players, that can wear on you a little bit. And then that just having that sort of mind presence at the table is going to take a lot longer. But yeah, 60 to 90 minutes is fine. I think you can play solo in under 60 minutes easily. 2-player, probably under 60 minutes easily, if both players are real familiar with the game and with the deck, depending on which expansion you're using, because there's going to be some learning curve to a certain extent. None of the expansions are very complicated, really. Once you kind of get into them and have explained them, they're all really straightforward. And it gets really cut down by the fact that the game, like I said in the walkthrough, where it says, hey, use the base game and this expansion only. Don't try to mix them in. Now you could like take Winter and mix some of those in and play No Man's Land. Like that probably would be okay, right? Because Winter is kind of all about getting little combos and scoring a lot of points. And No Man's Land is kind of the same thing, and those cards will interact with some of the resource generation that happens on the Wasteland board, if you will. But like if you mixed Winter plus New Era plus No Man's Land plus Moloch, then you're asking, that's just a lot going on. To kind of keep track of, and you wouldn't really, the deck would be watered down so much that you wouldn't really probably be able to pursue any kind of strategy, and the luck factor would just get raised really high, and whoever kind of was just, dealt into a particular expansion of cards, they would just kind of do their thing and probably win. So again, the playtime is going to stay low because the complexity level is never really going to get above a certain ceiling if you kind of play the rules as written. Now, my last pillar is, what is this game like? And I kind of mentioned at the beginning, Imperial Settlers, Empires of the North. If you watched my top 50 videos that I did a little earlier this year, I had Imperial Settlers, Empires of the North in there. And in that video, I kind of mentioned this game, because that's how long I've had this game for. And I had been playing this at the time, and I was like, oh man, and I'd like just gotten it. And I was like, man, I think I like this better, but I'm not sure. And so in the intervening few months there, I've had a chance to play both games. And I'm leaning this. I think I would replace now Empires of the North with this, because there's two things. The first thing we'll talk about is more of a personal thing. I don't think it's really kind of, I don't know, any objectivity to it, really. Is I've kind of come to like the draft as you play, build your deck or build your hand as you play kind of thing, because this has the whole lookout phase and the drawing of the cards, which isn't really there in Empires of the North, especially, where you kind of build your deck beforehand. Because the thing is that's really cool, and I like the deck building aspect of it. But I've run into issues with that game where, you know, you can kind of build a deck too good. You're like, here, you play Japan and I'll play Rome and this and that, and like, oh, that deck is really humming, you know, and it's just really, really working. And if you take a long enough break from the game, you're going to be like, how do I put these decks together right, you know, and all that stuff. So if you take a break and come back, it's difficult. Whereas this, if you take a break and come back, which I've done, because I played it, you know, years ago, and I come back and it's like, oh, well, you can kind of like learn as you play. And to me, that's just like more fun. Because then you can kind of get through a game and be like, oh, I see kind of how this expansion deck is working. Let's play it again, so that I can try these different combos, and then swap out the deck for different expansion. You've got a whole new set of combos to play. So it just sort of my like gamer lifestyle, I think, sort of lends itself to that. Whereas in the past, when I set those up, I really had a lot of fun tinkering and deck building, and I like the aspect of a game that is not a collectible game or a living card game. Although you could kind of argue Empires of the North is almost a living card game, because they had expansions coming out pretty frequently, and you could get little expansions and throw them in there. But I think now I'm in the space where I kind of want this more, where I could kind of play it, you know, kind of play the heck out of it and then put it away on the shelf and come back to it in a year or whatever, and then break it out again and kind of relearn it and kind of do that while I'm playing it, and that's just more fun. So that's kind of mark number one in favor of 51st State. And I do kind of like the theme more, like the Fallout theme that's there. The second part, though, is the solo mode in this, the Borgo one. It just destroys the solo mode that is over on Empires of the North world. The solo mode in this is excellent. It's really, really good. Just the fact that they got it to work with all the expansions, with the expansion action that the Borgo Automa does, is really cool. You can really kind of tweak with the difficulty level, and playing with like how nasty Borgo is, or like I was talking about with Moloch, you can really get in there and tweak with the difficulty level, and it's fun. Like, I would say it's kind of weird, because a lot of times when you play a solo game, you want to lose more than you win. And I'd say in this case, I win more than I lose for sure, but it's not like a guaranteed thing. Like, a lot of them will kind of come down to the wire. It kind of depends. Like, you know, some of the base game stuff, you know, I kind of got the hang of that, where I can kind of knock its teeth out. But, you know, with some of the other different expansions and things that it does, kind of based on how things are going, it's not like a guaranteed victory. So it's kind of a nice, pleasant, but with a little bit of an edge to the solo mode thing. That's been kind of my experience with it. And yeah, so I think it's excellent, because this is like the kind of game that I like to play often, but it's not the kind of game that will come out at like a game night too often, just because everybody's kind of have to be that same level of enthusiasm when it comes to like a card game, like a Race for the Galaxy, a Glory to Rome, you know, any of those kind of like big old card games with lots of like moving parts and combos and stuff like that. You can't just really like have somebody that plays it a lot and then say, hey, let's play this, because the level of like deck knowledge and all that stuff kind of gets in the way of everybody kind of having a good time. And it's not even fun for the person that's like, winning or knows the deck, because they're like, oh, look at all the stuff I did, like you just learned the deck. There's nothing really fun about that. So in the times where I'm like, but I really like this style of game, because if you watch the channel at all, multi-use cards is Joel's like Achilles heel in a way. This gives me that opportunity to really sit down and just say, oh, I feel like playing this kind of game and nobody's around to play it. This will meet the requirement. It'll kind of satiate the appetite a little bit in terms of that style of game, if you can find no one. And that's a really big bonus, because there's not really any good solo mode game, modes for this kind of style of multi-use games. Now, the Race for the Galaxy one is pretty decent, and that's ancient. That's like 15 years old, that one. But I would just probably play it on Steam or something, or on the app, because the AI, whoever, I can't remember, the Kelvin AI that was invented a while ago and then like baked into the app is fine. Like if I want to play Race for the Galaxy, I'll just play the app. And the solo for the Race for the Galaxy, which came out in Gathering of the Storm, I think it was the first expansion, is pretty decent, but it's a little bit fiddly and clunky to kind of the way it works. Actually, I think it was like the second or third video I ever did for that. It's good. Like, I like it. It's really good. This one is so easy breezy streamlined, and it still is like, it's not like as competitive or as nasty and unfair as the Race for the Galaxy one, because that one's just like total bullcrap sometimes. You're like, what? This is cheating. This one doesn't have that flair. It's like you're playing against a pretty okay opponent, which is fine, because it can still win, but you probably should win once you get to know the game. First you probably won't if you've never played the game before. So it's got a nice little spot, and again, it's not something you usually see in this space. So that's the reasons why this is knocked out Empires of the North. Now, the other thing I just want to say as a takeaway with this, two things. One is this can be very attacky, and so people may not like that kind of destruction aspect of the game, because you can raise your opponent's cards and things like that. Now, there's a very simple house rule, which I didn't see it in here, and I don't remember if I saw it in Master Set Edition rules, but I've seen it in Imperial Settlers rules, and it's kind of the same game. So when you go to do the raise action, you can raise a card from your hand, for example, and just get the raise resources that you get out of it. You can raise one of your opponent's built buildings that they have, and you could just make the rule that you cannot raise your opponent's buildings. You can still take the raise action to raise your own cards and do that if you want to play a more friendly game. Now, I don't see why you couldn't just include that rule here if you're playing with folks that don't want to be attacked. I think that's perfectly fine. Now, the nice thing that does here, and I think it's a very simple rule, but I think it should be highlighted, is that once I've played all my cards and done all my actions and I've passed, then you are prevented from being attacked. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic there, which to me kind of is the saving grace of that for folks that don't like it, because it can kind of be a feel bad moment where if you get something raised up and attacked like that. But it's usually something that people are trying to do a little bit earlier in the turn, so that you still have theoretically more actions and stuff to do later. I also don't mind it personally, because it fits the theme, and it's a very nasty kind of dirty theme in a way, and so it makes sense, and I like playing with that edge to the game, because you don't have a lot of attacking in a lot of these kind of multi-use cards games. So that's a thing I wanted to highlight. If you're like, oh, this looks really cool, just know that you can play this, and it could get nasty, especially with the New Era cards. So that's like the mean one, if you want to play with that. Now, the other thing is, the other nice part about that is the No Man's Land. You could play with the raising house rule that I said, mentioned just a second ago, but still play with the encroaching on the territories of the player board or so. So you can still kind of take and lose territory on that board. And so that's kind of a nice kind of middle ground as well. You kind of just play your normal card game, so you have your tableau of cards in front of you that are sort of safe. That's kind of like your home territory. And then the No Man's Land, that's where you can kind of do your fighting, because you can go in there and raise each other's outpost markers and stuff there. So that's kind of a nice middle ground, right? So you can fight over that little territory area control almost kind of game, where you're getting little bonuses out of the No Man's Land, and then your own little combo stuff you can set up internally. So there's that, and that kind of dovetails into my last point, which is it's really nice to have all this stuff in the one box with the nice trays and everything, and the nice, little compartments for each of the expansions. So it's very easy to say, let's do this, let's do that, let's plug and play this. Because if you watch the channel, I'm a big fan of like plug and play. Like, give me a fun system that's rock solid, and then we can kind of pick and choose kind of our mood and our flavor of what we want to go after. And everything's presented really, really nicely in the rule book and everything. It had been some time since I'd played it. So it was very easy to just get in there. I was like, oh yeah, this is how the rules work. Okay, so this expansion, this page, this expansion, this page. Some of the expansions at the beginning don't need rules explanations. They're just like, here's a couple of cards. There's no new mechanics, but here's some cards that, maybe need some clarification. That's it. So you just crack that open and away you go. So as a whole kind of package, I think you can't go wrong with this, honestly, if you're into this kind of game. Or if you had played 51st State a long time ago, the game's kind of evolved over all this time. And so yeah, so anyway, my high recommendation for 51st State Ultimate Edition, definitely in my top 50 games of all time now, because this has replaced Empires of the North. So we'll give it 6 months and see what happens. But anyway, take a look. Thanks.